Okay, hey everyone, good morning. Welcome back. Just getting the stream ready here. Sorry, I'm starting right close to 9 a.m. It's just today there was actually I had to call the campus security to unlock the classroom. It was locked over the weekend, I guess. And then when the first officer came, his key didn't work. Then he had to go and retrieve another one. So it kind of kept me out of the room until just a few minutes ago. But anyways, good to be with you. Better late than never. And I guess we're technically on time. It's just now turning 9 o'clock. So welcome back, and good to see you guys. Hi there, Julia, Ryan, Ellie, Eloise, Kylie, everyone else, Nicole. All right, so as you guys know, we're now working through the last topic in our semester, which has to do with life and death. Questions like what makes a human life go well, and is there any rational attitude that a person should take to the concept of death? We're starting with the work of Plato and his writings from his classic, the Republic, and the discussion that we find there labeled in our textbook on the harmony of the soul. So I'll try to just review and recap some of the points that we started on Friday, and then we'll finish up Plato, and we'll try to make some little bit of progress towards getting into the next author, which is Sartre. As I'm looking at the overall schedule of remaining dates, you guys know that next week we have 2 review sessions, and I'm going to distribute the study guide for those review sessions midweek this week. So probably sometime around Wednesday or so, you'll get the announcement through Canvas, and it'll contain the document with all the study guide questions. So you'll have around 2 weeks to be preparing for the test once you get the study guide questions, and then we'll have review sessions to have further support. So anyway, that's just a couple of things upcoming. Don't forget that your second paper, of course, is due this Friday, and you'll just email me that one whenever it's ready, and I'll be grading it right away, trying to get it all done before the weekend leading into finals week. So those are just a few quick announcements as I'm looking at the calendar and checking in with you guys. Hi, Grant, Dimitri, Finn, Marin, Elif, Steven, and everybody else. Good to see you guys. Okay, so let me just get my phone on the stream too. Okay, perfect. So then, life and death. Let's go back over into the world of the ancient Greek writer and philosopher Plato. Now, let's just try to remember the beginnings. The Platonic work called the Republic is a classic in philosophy and in Western, just the history of the West. It's a book that tries to give an account of what would make for the ideal human society for people to live in. So it's kind of like a utopian vision of a perfected, idealized society, what it would take, what it would involve to have a good ideal society like that. So what he calls that is the Republic. And I tried to start off the discussion of what would make a human life go well by talking to you about basic features of Plato's Republic, because you really need to know those features of the Republic to understand his article in this textbook. The reason for that is because he bases his model of what makes a human life go well on his overall model of what makes a society go well. So we have to learn about what his account is then of what makes a good society. And we started to work through it. So basically, he says that in the ideal republic, we have a harmonious system which contains 3 major component parts. So someone will tell me then in this chat, I guess, or however, what did you remember to be the 3 major parts of society according to Plato's Republic? So yeah, let's start with that. And anyone that knows can just say, or put in the chat, whatever the case may be. 3 parts of society, what, and what. Let's just, takes a little time, I know, after the weekend to refresh your memory and get back into the mode of academic and philosophical thinking, but what were those parts? And then once you tell me that, I'll continue. Okay, good. So I see you're telling me that there were merchants, warriors, and kings. Correct. So I'll draw some of the information up on the board again, and we'll go over some basic facts. Okay, so this is still all out of Plato and the Republic, which was written thousands of years ago in ancient Athens, Greece. In our textbook, they labeled this section of the Plato Republic on the harmony of the soul. But anyway, there were three main parts of the Republic, which you guys correctly identified. Okay, so three major components, three main sections of society. You had the merchants, and aside from that, warriors, and then finally the kings. Merchants, warriors, kings. So each one has a different task and function to perform within the Republic. I'll just say a few things about what each one does. The merchants are those who are supposed to be producing goods and services that they can sell and trade for profit. So that's a major, large category of members of the Republic. That's the largest section of the Republic. Most people are in it. So this is just really the equivalent of working people who just work a trade or craft and make money off of that. So that's a lot of people, as you guys know. But it's not everyone in society. Some people have a different task or function, and that we can see another case being the warriors. Warriors are not those that own and operate businesses to produce goods and services that are traded or sold for profit, but rather those are people that provide for the common defense. So those would be like the security forces. You can think of the military, the police, the National Guard, and those kinds of members of society who are not there to, produce goods that they trade for profit, but rather to provide security against external threats and internal instability if it ever does arise. And then you have the kings. Kings would be all important because these are the political leadership class of the Republic, and they're the equivalent of, heads of state, leaders, senators, congressmen, presidents, prime ministers, monarchs. And so what they do, obviously, is they run the society, they create policy, and they also are able to control and order the warriors into service if needed be. So we have these three parts of the Republic. Now, according to Plato, we're supposed to divide people into the three categories based on their natural aptitudes, which are somehow measured and evaluated through rigorous testing over the course of one's educational career. So at the conclusion of primary education, tests were given. People who passed continued on to higher education, but those that failed were placed in the warrior category. And if you passed that test but failed the second one, now you're in the merchant class. But if you surpass both tests, you'll continue on to a third tier of education that extends well into your adult life. And at the end of that, you would become one of the kings. So kings are appointed to political leadership through measurable outcomes in tests rather than political elections and democratic elections. And that's definitely intended by Plato, because he says many times in the Republic that he's skeptical of the sustainability of democracy because he thinks that it leads to tyranny in the end, which then leads to oligarchy, back to democracy, and on until you establish the enlightened despotism of the Republic, I guess, as some have put it. Okay, well, the last thing I was getting to on Friday, just before we ran out of time, was to tell you about the different virtues that Plato says the parts of the Republic have. By the way, I know I keep referring to Plato, and that's accurate because he's the writer, but in this dialogue, as with many of the Platonic writings, it's Socrates that's talking. And in the dialogue, if you read it, it's actually a discussion between Socrates, Plato's teacher, and Plato's older brother, whose name is Glaucon. So anyway, Glaucon and Socrates are talking about the concepts of the Republic, and they started to mention the different virtues of each part of the Republic. Okay, so I think I closed the meeting by just trying to tell you briefly that a virtue is like a quality or a feature that something has when it's able to do its job excellently well, when it's able to perform its function or task very well. So that's what virtue is in the Greek usage. A quality that something has when it is able to perform its function excellently well, when it can do its thing very well. Okay, just the definition of virtue to give you another reminder of that. And I think I tried to help you understand the concept with a quick example. And the example I mentioned was suppose that you have a knife, and a knife has obviously got a function, which is to cut. So if it's a good knife, what would be its quality that would make it a good knife? To be sharp, because sharp knives function very excellently at cutting, and dull knives don't. So sharpness is the virtue of knives. But now, what about the virtue of each part of the republic? Okay, so he thinks there is one for each, and I'll put them there and give you the definition. Then we'll try to talk about each point a little bit. So the virtue that is distinctive of merchants is supposed to be temperance. So that's the word temperance, Temperence. And temperance just simply means to have moderation and self-control over your appetites and your desires and stuff. So having self-control and moderation with your appetites or desires. Okay, so temperance, that's the merchant's virtue. When they're good merchants and they're able to, be very good at their task, producing goods and services for society, which they trade for profit and sell, then they have to have temperance. Now, the warriors, they have a different duty, a different task, which is not, to profit and make goods, but instead to provide for the common defense. So the virtue they would exhibit if they were good warriors would be courage. Sometimes they say bravery. It's kind of the same thing, but I'll use courage. And courage is just being willing and able to face danger and face threats when it's needed, when it's important. So the ability to face danger when it is necessary and appropriate. Okay, so obviously, if you think of soldiers or police officers, if they're going to be good at what they do, capable of providing for security and repelling threats, then they have to be willing and able to face danger. If they were afraid to rush into a dangerous situation, then they couldn't be very effective at doing their job. So, if you're really, really scared to ever be at risk and you don't ever want to have your life put at risk, then you shouldn't be a warrior, because that's what it's all about. You have to be willing to take some chances because your job is to provide security, which sometimes involves risk. Okay, so warriors have courage, merchants have temperance. Now, what about the kings? The all-important leadership category. They have the virtue, if they got it, of wisdom. Okay, so wisdom is simply being able to exercise sound judgment and make rational decisions based on, correct judgment. There's many ways to put the concept of wisdom. I'm just trying to kind of express the essence of how it would play into being a king in a society. You have to have the ability to make correct, rational decisions based on a proper analysis of all the facts. So you basically have to be wise. If you're idiotic, stupid, dumb, then you're not going to be able to understand what to do in a given situation, nor will you be able to assess the situation and to understand what it even is. So we can't have political leadership that leads a nation or a state into ruin because the people that are appointed to hold power don't know what's good for the country and make bad and short-sighted or ill-advised decisions. So anyway, when you have a good republic that's flourishing and functioning at its excellently best level, then all three parts of the republic are doing their job according to their virtue. And importantly, he also says that they should not be trying to overstep their bounds. So they should not be interfering with the activities of the other parts. That means that merchants, for example, should not be trying to, overthrow the kings and seize power, nor should the warriors be staging a military coup to do the same. They should be living in willful and peaceful submission to the proper authority of these kings. And the kings also, I guess, they should rule, they should preside, they should make decisions on policy and everything else, but not necessarily micromanage perhaps battlefield decisions that warriors would be better equipped to make, and not to overly involve themselves in matters of the free market as long as nothing corrupt or fraudulent is happening there. So when merchants do their job well, they have self-control. If they didn't have self-control, they would become too greedy. They would start to sell poor and poorly constructed goods at an inflated rate, leading to the financial harm and ruin of the country. So they should be able to make money and profit, no problem with that. Obviously, that's right at the core of what they're doing, but to do so in a way that respects their own limitations and is not overly desirous of profit such that they become, hucksters, con artists, and frauds. Warriors, as we've said, if they're good warriors, they have to be willing to face danger, and that means having bravery and courage. If they were cowardly and afraid, then they would not be able to discharge their duties. And again, if kings lacked wisdom, if they were short-sighted, narrow-minded, unable to process complex arguments, then they would not be good at their job either. So a good republic that flourishes is one where all members of society are placed into their proper category. Each part does its job according to its virtue, and they all peacefully harmonize and willfully submit to the rule of the king. And let me read a little of the book and the words of Plato so you can see his way of putting this. He says, we haven't forgotten that the city was just because each of the three classes in it was doing its own work. So we must remember that each one of us in whom each part is doing its own work will himself be just and do his own. So now I guess what I'll do is I'll try to explain how this is supposed to be applied to the analysis of the individual human soul and what makes a human life go well. So let's talk about the three parts of the soul next, because those are supposed to be exactly parallel to these three parts of the republic. So like we are the republic in microcosm. Your individual soul is kind of a little miniature state. And to the Greeks, to the ancient Greeks, there was the belief in the immortal soul. Many people, of course, still believe in this, but it was taken as a core tenet of belief of the ancient Greek world. So this would have been a common idea. But one thing you might find interesting is that in Plato's mind, anyway, the soul was divided into three parts. So let me show them the three divisions of the human soul. Three main parts of the republic, three main parts of the human soul coming next. Okay, so within you, assuming the Greek doctrine was correct, there would be these three parts of your soul. So one of the parts is what he calls your appetitive part. Okay, and then there is the spirited part. And then you have the rational part of your soul. Okay, so the appetitive part of you is the part of you that has appetites, that desires things, that wants to satisfy these desires and appetites and get the things that you don't have. So I'll give a brief description. Okay, so it says appetitive, the part of your soul that has desires and appetites that want to be fulfilled. Okay, so one thing about being alive, as you guys I'm sure know, is that you want things. You want right now, I guess, to graduate college, or that's like a big picture desire. There's also smaller little daily things. Maybe you want a certain kind of meal for lunch. You're thinking of getting tacos, and so you have an appetite for that. That would be literal appetite. But appetites don't have to necessarily deal with just having the desire for food or edible items. It's like possessions, experiences. Maybe you want to have kids someday, get married, own property, have a business, explore the world, travel to certain places you haven't gone. So whatever these appetites may be, you want possessions, some kind of car, some kind of I want the PS5 this summer, so I'm looking forward to that. But anyway, once I'm done with this semester. So we have appetites, right? And that's one part of your soul, the part of you that kind of keeps reminding you, hey, go get that, or keep thinking about it because you still want it. So that's one part of you. Now, this appetitive part of your soul is supposed to be comparable to the merchant class in the Republic, because the merchants are those who, as we've learned, produce goods and services for the desired profit. And so the profit that they want, which drives their business or industry forward, is kind of like the appetitive part of your soul in microcosm, because your soul has a part that also wants things, and of whatever kind, whether that be wealth, experiences, or whatever we just talked about. Okay, now the spirited part of you is the next portion of the soul. And this compartment is the part of you that basically has a lot of passion and pride, and that's competitive, hates to lose, loves to win. So passionate, prideful, competitive, loves to win, hates to lose, etc. So that's another part of you. It's the part of you that would be activated if you were, like, I don't know, on a sporting team or something, and you're competing to win the game, and you're giving it your all. Or it could be the part of you that hates to be dishonored or disrespected, like if somebody did something wrong to you or to people that you care about, that would stand up for yourself or for those other people. So there's a lot of passion there, pride, competition, the desire to display skill. That's the spirited part of you, right? So it's not necessarily about a desire to have things, but rather to show forth, its example of passion, pride, and competitiveness. Now, the rational part of you, let me make another point. The spirited part is comparable to the warriors. That's what it's supposed to be, compared with in the Republic as a part of the state. Because the warrior class is the part that fights, defends, and tries to do so nobly with a sense of honor and pride. So the part of you within that's like the little fighter that doesn't want to lose, that wants to overcome adversity and to show its strength, that would be the spirited part of you too. Now the rational part is the kind of wise decision maker. That's like the intellect within you. So okay, so the part of you that deliberates over things, that makes, that makes all the tough calls, that tries to set emotion aside or, desire to the side, and tries to do the thing that it judges to be in your and everyone else's best interest. So the intellectual, decision-making, analytical, calm, and composed part of you, that would be your rational part. And this is supposed to be comparable to the kings within the society too, because as we learned, those were supposed to be the leadership class that make decisions and are supposed to kind of run over and preside everything. So as we said with the Republic, what makes the best Republic is for each part of the Republic to exhibit its virtue and for them to work in cooperation and harmony and not overstep their bounds. And the same would be true of the parts of the soul. So if you're looking to live the best human life, now we're hearing from Plato and Socrates that the way to do that would be to cultivate the virtue for each part of your soul that corresponds to the virtue as we saw in each part of the state. So now, what's the virtue of each part? It's the same. So that's nice because it's easy to teach and learn. The same virtue of the merchant class is the virtue of the appetitive part of your soul. So what would that be? Temperance. Temperance is the virtue of your appetites. So you should have appetites and you should desire for them to be fulfilled. But at the same time, that has to be balanced with some measure of restraint, control, moderation. Because, if you just follow your appetites and you have no limits to those, and, then you can even become a person who's like a kind of hedonistic pleasure seeker that ends up doing harm to yourself or other people. Like people pursue the experiences of drugs or, risky lifestyles and things because they're always seeking more and more pleasure and they can't get enough. Sometimes people will end up committing crimes, fraud, even theft, because their appetites get the better of their better judgment. So for your appetitive part to do the best job for your overall soul, it should make its contribution, but do so with temperance. The spirited part of you, that again should have bravery or courage, so that when it's appropriate, it will be able to act. So the spirited part of you should be cultivated in such a way that it's willing and able to act when it's appropriate and when it's called to do so by your wisdom and not on its own account. And of course, as before with the rational part of you, there should be wisdom. The part that makes decisions, the part that analyzes information and makes the right judgment call should be wise and, thoughtful, rational, capable of engaging in long-term judgment and not just going for the shortest term goals. So anyway, then, when the three parts of your soul are in harmony, all of them deferring to and following the leadership of your reason, and operating according to their own virtue without doing the work of other parts, then you're living well and your soul is in good harmony and your life will go well. I'll read a little bit more then from Plato and you can see his words. He says, isn't it appropriate for the rational part to rule, since it is really wise and exercises foresight on behalf of the whole soul, and for the spirited part to obey and be its ally? And Glaucon says, certainly, Socrates. Socrates adds, and isn't it, as we were saying, a mixture of music, poetry on the one hand, and physical training on the other that makes the two parts harmonious, stretching and nurturing the rational part with fine words and learning, relaxing the other part through soothing stories and making it gentle by means of harmony and rhythm? Precisely that's true, Socrates. And these two, having been nurtured in this way, he's talking about how the rational part will work cooperatively with the spirited part to kind of tame it and make it domesticated for the purposes of its command under the rational part of the soul. It says, these two, having been nurtured in this way and having truly learned their own roles and educated in them, will govern the appetitive part, which is by nature insatiable for money and is the largest part in each person's soul. They will watch over it so that it is not filled with the so-called pleasures of the body, and that it does not become so big and strong that it no longer does its own work, but tries to enslave and rule the other classes that it's not fit to rule, thereby overturning everyone's whole life. And Glaucon says, that's right. Socrates then says, then wouldn't these two parts also do the finest job of guarding the whole soul and body against external enemies, reason by planning, spirit by fighting, following its leader, and carrying out the leader's decisions through courage? He says, yes, that's true. And it's because of the spirited part, I suppose, that we call the single individual courageous, namely, when it preserves through pain and pleasure the declarations of reason about what is to be feared and what is not. And we will call him wise because of that small part of himself that rules in him and makes those declarations and has within it the knowledge of what is good for each part and for the whole soul, which is the community of all three parts. And isn't he moderate because of the friendly and harmonious relations between these same parts? Namely, when the ruler and the ruled believe in common that the rational part should rule, and they do not engage in civil war against it. And he says, a person will be just because of what we have mentioned, and in that way. So, justice in the individual is much similar then to justice in the republic overall, when we compare the parts of the soul to these parts of the state. Now, he says after this, that whenever a person lapses into vice, or they engage in bad behavior that's not to their own advantage, that kind of behavior always is a result of an imbalance or a disharmony among the various parts of the soul. It will result from the lower parts, the inferior parts of the soul, trying to seize too much control and take over the role of your reason. So let me give you some examples of that. Suppose that somebody had committed theft, right? So they see a nice guitar in somebody's car and they just break into it and take it. Can you believe people do that? But anyway, someone committed theft. Which part of their soul do you think would have been overwhelming and dominating at that time, taking more control than it's supposed to have? So it sort of stepped out of its lane and made control decisions, but it's not supposed to. Which part of the soul is becoming overactive when one person commits theft? No, Ryan. No. So let's go again. Think about the answer for a moment. Which part of the soul would be overactive when a person commits theft? It's not your reason. No, absolutely not. Your reason would tell you you're not supposed to commit theft. That's what your long-term and rational judgment would say. But another part of your soul might just set reason aside because it can't have its, I don't want to say it. You're going to tell me. Which part of the soul is becoming too active when a person does commit theft? It's the appetitive part, correct? Yes. Your appetites, things that you want, you cannot delay the gratification for them by just waiting until you have the money to buy it. So your thought is, I'm going to take this without having any proper means to pay or with a valid transfer of ownership granted on me by the actual possessor of the item. So it is your appetites that become out of control. Your appetites cannot be turned away. You're not listening to your better judgment. So you set your reason aside and commit the act of theft when you steal. Now, if you're following your reason would overrule the unwise impulses of your appetite. So in this case, we see a person behaves badly and does things that are unjust simply because their soul is not in a proper order and organization. Their appetites have gone out of control and they're leading them into poor decisions. Sort of like if a person, I don't know, took a bunch of drugs and they're killing their health, right? If their reason would tell them this is not really good for you, but their appetites don't listen to reason and they just seek their satisfaction regardless of whether this is done on the basis of your better judgment. So you know that theft is not like a wise decision that someone will deliberate on and make a careful and calm decision about it. Ryan, if that's maybe what you were thinking, like it's reasonable to steal, you're out of line with Plato's account of what the Greeks thought was virtuous. It's not a good thing to do. It's not virtuous to steal, but your appetites want you to do it. So you need to turn those down and have a little more moderation over them. Now, here's another example. Suppose that you're driving around and someone you're driving on the road and you accidentally take a turn or you change lanes into someone's lane, and without noticing it, you kind of cut this person off a little bit. Or maybe I should change the role around. I'll make you the aggressor, okay? So someone cuts you off a little bit, and it's not so nice. And you know what? You're so upset about it for whatever reason. You can't let it go. You're full of road rage now. So you're following this person around, honking at them, flashing your high beams, until finally they get out of the car, you park next to them, and you get out and you beat them silly, commit assault, okay, because of the disrespect that you felt on the road being cut off. Now, if that happened to you, which part of your soul would be too active at that time? It would be overwhelming and too strong, stepping out of its lane and taking control of your entire decision-making process. Which part of your soul in that case is getting a little bit too powerful and needs to be curbed and set back by a different part? You'll let me know now. So we are talking about the road rage assault case. If that did happen, it's because which part of you is, taking too much control? Based on the definitions and examples given, there's only one option. What is it? Yeah, that's right. The spirited part. Correct, Eric and Eloise and others. It's the spirited part there because it's the part of you that says, hey, I can't deal with disrespect. I can't deal with dishonor. If someone's going to slight me, I'm going to make them pay. Now, is it done on the basis of your better judgment? No, because your calm reason would say, although you feel upset, it's not going to be better for you or anybody else to commit such an act. What would be the purpose of it? It's not like you're going to somehow educate them in a better way of driving and the harm's already been done. So it'd be better for you to set aside your feelings of resentment and just deal with the momentary inconvenience or slight. But when you don't listen to your reason and you just go with your overactive, spirited passions, then you might end up committing bad behavior in this case too. So bad behavior that's poorly considered, that's not wise, is always because of the lower and inferior parts of the soul taking over control from your reason and making it too weak to exert its own influence. So you always have to empower the reasonable part within you so that it can set back and overturn poor decisions and impulsive actions that your spirited or your appetitive nature might want you to make. And that's what all bad behavior comes from, according to Plato and these Greeks. It's when your appetites are out of control or your passions are too powerful and you're not listening to reason within you, which you do have the voice of reason, but you're setting it aside. And so he says the same here. He says, the person will be just because of what we've mentioned. For example, if we came to an agreement about whether someone similar in nature and training to the city had embezzled a deposit of gold or silver, who do you think would consider him to have done it rather than someone who is not like him? And Glaucon says no one. So someone with the similar soul in the same structure as the Republic would never have committed embezzlement or a deposit of gold or silver that was fraudulent. And would he have anything to do with temple robberies, thefts, betrayals of friends in private life or cities, in public life? No, nothing. Because again, theft and such actions as those proceed from an imbalance and a disharmony among the soul, namely when the appetitive parts become too strong. And would he be untrustworthy in keeping an oath or agreement? No, how could he be? And adultery, disrespect for parents, neglect of the gods, these would be more in keeping with every other kind of character than his. And again, Glaucon says, with every one. And he says, and isn't the cause of all this that every part within him does his own work, whether it's ruling or being ruled? So when you have the just harmony of the soul, that's what it would be. Yes, then are you still looking for justice to be something other than this power, the one that produces men and cities of the sort we have described? No, I certainly am not. So Socrates then says, then the dream we had has been completely fulfilled. Our suspicion that with the help of God, we had hit upon the origin and pattern of justice right at the beginning in founding our city. So that's what he says about it. But there's one more interesting thing in the essay that I kind of wanted to also cover. He asks this question to Glaucon next, after he establishes that to live your best life, you would want to get the soul within you in the proper order, empower your reason, allow each part to act according to its own virtue, and have the lower parts obey and defer to your reason. But what if a person thought, can't I benefit from being unjust as long as nobody knows about it? And Socrates asks this question to Glaucon. He says, do you think that it would benefit somebody, that they could profit or benefit from being unjust as long as nobody ever finds out about it? So suppose that you could do anything bad that you wanted to, and you could be guaranteed that no one would find out about it, right? There's actually a myth in an old legend in ancient Greece literature about the ring of Gyges, and that's mentioned in other writings of Plato and Greek writings. But in the ring of Gyges myth, there was this mythical ring, where if you found it and put it on, it would cloak you within invisibility. So you'd be invisible at that time wearing the ring. And with the invisibility on, of course, you'd be tempted, right, to do all kinds of things that no one could ever know about because you'd be invisible. So you could gain access to places where you're not allowed to be, or you could easily steal things because no one would be able to see this thief. So anyway, then, whether it's through that example or just in general, consider the case of someone who could do things that were unjust but would 100% for sure get away with it and no one would ever catch them. And the question that Socrates asks to Glaucon is, do you think that that could benefit somebody? Unjust behavior, injustice that goes undetected. Now, I don't know if any of you guys have a view about that. Probably some of you do. But even if, whether you have a view or not, I don't know, what do you guess would be Plato's or Socrates' claim? Does a person benefit? Can a person benefit from being unjust when no one knows about it? What would be your wild guess that he says yes or no? He doesn't think so, right? I don't know. Maybe that's not a surprise. I would hope not, because, there's a lot of substance to these writings. And so, no, he does not think that you could possibly benefit from unjust behavior or injustice, even if nobody in the whole world could possibly know about it. And to explain why, he gives an example. I'm gonna explain his example to you now, but just before saying it, the overall general idea here is that when you do unjust things, even if nobody ever finds out and you're the only one that knows, it still harms you because it corrupts your soul. And so what you're doing is you're doing damage to the internal configuration of your soul. You're empowering the lower parts and you're weakening the highest and most godly part, which is the rational intellect within you. So he says you're paying a cost when you do unjust behavior, and it's a cost that you bring about onto yourself, even if no one else in society knows about it, because what you're doing is you're messing up your soul and you're destroying it and causing it to live at war with itself. So now that's the burden that you have to carry with you, living with a soul that is at war with itself inside instead of living in harmony and peace. But here I'll explain via his example, which is, I thought, pretty cool and interesting. So to make the explanation as to why unjust behavior that nobody knows about still doesn't benefit you, he gives us this metaphor of like a three-headed creature. So I will try to explain this three-headed creature metaphor / example now. Okay, so three-headed creature, here we go. First of all, as you guys maybe know, I'm not the best at drawing stuff, so it's going to be a pretty crude drawing, but I'll do what I can. So here we have the body of the creature. That's not too bad, I guess. But up here we have three heads. So let's say that one of them is kind of hard to describe, but it's kind of like a section where there's a bunch of little snapping gargoyle heads. Okay, so I'm trying my best to depict what's described in the book. So this is like a head with a bunch of littler heads that are branching off of it. And I'm putting little exclamation points and stuff because what these little heads are they're like gargoyle heads that are hungry. And they're like, feed me now. I need to eat. And they're always bugging you. They're always kind of desiring things. They want things that they want to eat. They're snapping at you and all of that. So that's the gargoyle section. Over here, we have, it's described as like a lion head, the noble, king of the jungle lion. So definitely, this is not your like top grade lion image, but we're just working with what we have here, okay? So say this is the perfect image of a lion, and I don't know, try to make him look a little more fierce with the mouth, perhaps. There you got the lion head number 2, king of the jungle, lion, noble. Middle, though, is the human head. So that's just a normal human being like me or you. But let me try to make it a little bit smaller, actually. That'll have a reason for that. Okay, so now, three-headed creature, lion, human, and then the gargoyle snapping head section. So each of these 3 parts is supposed to stand for a different part of the soul that we've all now learned about. Okay, so if you can maybe make a guess, it's like you got to match the parts to the heads. The little hungry snapping gargoyles that are like, feed me. I bet you can guess what that stands for or represents in this 3-part division of the soul that is described by Plato. What do you think it is that these gargoyles stand for in terms of a part of the soul? You're going to just throw it out there. Is it the appetitive, the spirited, or the rational? Yeah, it is the appetitive, correct, because that's their only thing. They're just all about feed me, I need to eat, and I'm constantly hungry. So they're always seeking the desired fulfillment of their appetites. That's what the gargoyles represent anyway. Okay, now to the lion, noble beast of the jungle, got a lot of pride and all of that. Maybe you can guess that this is supposed to be the spirited part, right? That's the fighter, the competitor, and the rest that I've said. So then, the human being, obviously, we're in process of elimination, and I hope it makes sense because the human being's smarter, after all, than an animal or these little beasts. So the human then is supposed to signify and stand for the rational part within you that's supposed to be the leader that makes all the decisions. Okay, so here's the next part of this example. I want you to imagine and suppose that even though these 3 heads are all there, when other people look at the individual from an outside point of view, they only see one. So they only see the outward presentation of one of these 3. And just tell me if you could guess which of the 3 do you think that people see when they look. It's not the weirdest ones. So when others are looking at this individual with the 3 heads, they really only see the one that looks like what? The human being, right? So to all outside appearances, this is just a human being walking around like you and me. But now I want you to suppose the following. Suppose that inside, behind the scenes, what people cannot see is this, that the gargoyles are snapping at and lunging at the human being head. And so they're constantly like causing him to cower in fear and terror. And as he's doing that, he's getting bit up and attacked from the other side by this lion too. So imagine that inside, the human being is constantly living in fear and terror as he's warding off threats and attacks from these other 2 parts that are there. Now, is that the best way to live? No. If everybody else sees the person, they're just going to see like a happy, smiling human face. But when you are unjust, when you have a record of bad, unjust behavior, this is what you do to yourself. You empower your appetites and your spirited nature, and you make your reasonable, rational part very weak so that it basically becomes enslaved by the other parts, and it is dragged around by them wherever they want to go, and it cannot exert its influence. So think about, like, I don't know, a person who's like a hardcore drug addict or something, and they're ruining their health, and they're going to, ruin a bunch of relationships, perhaps not be able to complete their schooling, hold down a job, keep a family, or whatever the other things may be. They're listening to the appetites, but their human being part that wants to make a better decision is being snuffed out and silenced. So it's like the human within you, which really should be the most human part and the most true part of you, has been made so weak that it's basically just along for the ride, wherever these poorly decided appetitive decisions are going to lead it. Or if you're a person who keeps getting into all kinds of fights and conflicts, you keep on flying off the handle, smallest little slight gets you upset. Now you're known as this hostile, aggressive, surly person that people don't have long lasting and mutual and warm friendships and relationships with. Now it is because the spirited part of you is dominant and you can't exert your rational control over it. So he says, even if nobody knows about it, and that's the reason that the one head is shown to everyone, because nobody knows, right, that this internal sort of configuration exists. Even if nobody else can discover these facts, you put your soul at war with itself inside, and so you have to live with that, and you have to live with the corrupted soul that's now been created through your poor conduct. And so that's why you do not benefit from bad behavior that is unjust. Even if no one ever knows about it and you get away with all of it scot-free, you're living now with an internally conflicted and a soul intention. So here I'll read it. He says this. If someone, okay, wait, get to the left column on 746. He says, I think someone said at some point that injustice profits a completely unjust person who's believed to be just. Isn't that so? Glaucon says it is. Socrates says, well, then let's discuss this with him. How? By fashioning an image of the soul in words, so that the person who says this will know what they're saying. What sort of image? One like the creatures that legends tell us used to be in ancient times, such as the Chimera, Scylla, Cerberus, or any other of the multitude of others, in which many different kinds of things are said to have grown naturally into one. Yes, the legends tell us of such things. Well, then, fashion a single kind of multicolored beast with a ring of many heads that it can grow and change at will, some from gentle, some from savage animals. That's the gargoyle thing. That's work for a clever artist. However, since words are more flexible than wax, consider it done. Then fashion one other kind, that of a lion, and another of a human being. But make the first, the snapping gargoyles, the largest, and the lion second to it in size. And he says the sculpting is done. Now join the three of them into one so that they somehow grow together naturally. They're joined. Then fashion around them the image of one of them, that of a human being, so that anyone who sees only the outer covering and not what is inside will think it is a single creature, a human being. Okay, and so he says then, if somebody says that injustice benefits you, and that doing just things brings no advantage, then let's tell him that he is saying that it is good for you to feed the beast and make it strong, and also the lion and all that pertains to him, and then to weaken, starve the human within, so that he is dragged along wherever either of the other two leads, and then leave the parts to bite and kill each other rather than making them accustomed to each other and friendly. That's what someone who praises injustice is saying. But on the other hand, wouldn't someone who maintains that just things are good and profitable be saying first that all our words and deeds should ensure that the human being within the human has the most control, that he should take care of the many-headed beast as a farmer does his animals, feeding and domesticating the gentle ones, preventing the savage ones from growing, and then he should make the lion's nature his ally, care for the community of all the parts, and bring them up in such a way that they will be friends with each other and with himself. That's what someone who praises justice is saying. And so this is, I think, a powerful quote from the Plato. He says, quoting Socrates, from every point of view then, from every point of view, anybody that praises justice speaks the truth, and anybody who praises injustice is speaking falsely. And that is whether we look at the matter from the point of view of pleasure, good reputation, or advantage. A man or woman that praises justice tells the truth, but one who condemns it has nothing good to say and does not know what they're talking about. So really kind of bold and clear argument from Socrates to you, speaking to you from thousands of years ago. He says, don't follow the counsel and the advice of people who say, just do bad stuff and try to get away with it. As long as you get away with it, there's no harm and it's to your advantage. He says, these people don't have your best interests in mind because what they're asking you to do is to corrupt and ruin your soul. And if you do that, you're going to have to live with it forever. And having a corrupted soul, that's a harm that who can do to you? Just you. So it's a uniquely personal harm because it's only capable of you to do it to yourself. No other person can say to you, hey, I just corrupted your soul. You're welcome. That can't happen. You have to make decisions that undermine your own integrity and that empower the more vicious parts of you instead of the greater and better parts. So he says, be wise and don't follow the poor counsel of those that ask you to do unjust things, because when they say that that'll benefit you as long as you don't get caught, they don't know what they're talking about, and they don't seek your best interests, if that's the case. Another example along the same lines, he says, suppose that you had a child, right? And you had people that said, I'll give you as much money as you want if you just let me take this child and do whatever I want with them, like torture and other terrible things that you could imagine. Now, if you took the deal and you're like, okay, $1 trillion, just put it in my account and Venmo me that and I'll be good to go. And if they did, you would be fantastically wealthy. But Socrates asks, would that profit you in the real kind of final moral and human sense. No, you would not be better off sitting there with as much money as possible, knowing that you got it on the basis of selling off, your son or daughter to slavery to savage men. And so he says, in the same way, how can you really feel like you're doing well if you sell out and enslave the human part within you to these lower parts of your soul and think that that's to your benefit? It's not. It would be like saying, okay, let me just give up someone that's really important for these, temporary and transitory benefits. And he says that in light of this argument, can it profit anyone to acquire gold unjustly if by doing so he enslaves the best part of himself to the most vicious? If you got gold by enslaving your son or daughter to savage and evil men, it would not profit you, no matter how much gold you got. So then, how could you fail to be wretched if you enslave the most divine part of yourself to the most godless and polluted one, and think you're accepting gifts in return for a terrible destruction? So, anyway, that's one attitude and perspective on what makes a human life go well. Empower your reason, allow it to preside, have control over the lower parts of your soul, and have each one of those parts doing its task according to its virtue in willful obedience and submission to your reason. But, it's not the only view about what makes a human life go well. So we're going to also see a couple of other perspectives on this in the next couple meetings. Wednesday, we'll take a look at a 20th century writer who has a radically different outlook, according to which it's much more subjective and individual than this kind of one-size-fits-all conception that the Greeks had. So do stick with it and try to read the work of Jean-Paul Sartre, Existentialism, for Wednesday, and we'll cover that then. And in the meantime, I'll be developing your guys' study guide for the final. I'll distribute it midweek this week and keep working on your second papers, which are going to be due on Friday. Okay then, guys, so that's about it. We're out of time for now. Let me make sure that everyone's good, and then I'll close the stream real fast and see you back on Wednesday. So are we all right? Let me know one time. Okay, thanks, everybody. I see you there. Have a good day then, and let me know if you need anything. I'll be in touch. Okay, bye-bye.
People say bye to you?
Yes, they do.